Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky tugged at the heartstrings of the entire U.S. Congress earlier this week with an emotional appeal for help. And so, as you might expect, his speech struck a chord with many House members and senators. Like most Americans, we want to help Ukraine in any way possible. But there's one thing President Zelensky is asking for, which I believe we absolutely cannot and should not do. During his address on Wednesday, President Zelensky called for the U.S. and NATO to implement and enforce a no-fly zone.
The whole world. Is this a lot to ask for, to create a no-fly zone over Ukraine to save people? Is this too much to ask? Humanitarian no-fly zone, something that that Russia would not be able to terrorize our free cities.
It is a lot to ask, even for a country bravely fighting for its survival. But now there is growing bipartisan support for the idea after Zelensky's speech. House Democratic Caucus Chairman Hakeem Jeffries told Axios that he's open to the idea now, saying, quote, "I wouldn't say a no-fly zone is off the table." It's a key statement from one of the most powerful Democrats in Congress. And there's plenty of support for the idea on the other side of the aisle. Mississippi Republican Senator Roger Wicker has been one of the most vocal proponents of a no-fly zone. He argued that such a move would not automatically trigger World War III, as many fear, telling Axios, quote, "I just think it's not all or nothing. There are a myriad of nuanced ways to protect Ukraine from indiscriminate bombings of civilians." Brian Fitzpatrick, a Republican congressman from Pennsylvania, agreed, saying, quote, "We can ground airplanes without even firing a shot. I'm sure one of the factors is that they don't want to front that technology, but the technology does exist, and we can do it." Now, the congressman's talking about using a combination of electromagnetic pulse sonar and cyber means to keep Russian planes grounded. Trouble is, what he's talking about probably doesn't actually exist. Former Congressman Denver Riggleman, who served as a senior consultant in the Pentagon and helped build the type of technology that the congressman's referencing, basically said that that type of technological attack is practically impossible. But look, even if maybe it is, are we really prepared to go forward with a no-fly zone despite the risks? Most Americans apparently are. While the latest numbers are down from their 74% high of last week, a majority of Americans still support it. CBS News poll earlier this week found that 59% of Americans currently support a no-fly zone. But it always depends on how you ask the question. So you have to wonder, are we being clear on what this really means? First off, the operation would be far more complex than many realize. Back in 1999, U.S. and NATO combat jets took more than 2 months to establish a very small no-fly zone in Serbia, one which is about 5,000 square miles. Ukraine's roughly 50 times that size, well over 200,000 square miles. Now, a no-fly zone wouldn't have to cover all that territory, but it would certainly have to be enforced in Kyiv, Odessa, and other large areas. And of course, the Russian military operation is far more complex than that of Serbia's. Further, in the Serbian complex, the U.S. and NATO fired nearly 750 missiles to enforce the no-fly zone. Are we really saying that would not lead Putin to retaliate against the United States? And even if that is your answer, that your answer is, I don't think he would do it, how sure are we of that? And people ask, what's the difference in doing this when we're already giving Ukraine weapons and aid? It's the same difference that exists in every other international conflict, such as when Russia armed the Syrians when they fought against the U.S., or when the U.S. armed the Afghans when they fought against Russia. It's totally different from firing directly upon the Russian military, which a no-fly zone would certainly entail. On Thursday, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin responded, arguing he responded to those who are arguing for a no-fly zone.
There's no such thing as a no-fly zone light. A no-fly zone means that you're in a conflict with Russia.
Bottom line, this would be nearly impossible to execute in a time frame that would help the Ukrainians. And the vast majority of missiles and damage being done to Ukraine is not coming from the air, but rather the land and sea. Defense Department officials estimate that most of the approximately 980 missiles which the Russians have launched thus far have come from ground or ships. So the benefits of a no-fly zone, in my view, just don't outweigh the enormous potential costs. But as I mentioned, the idea has many proponents, and one of those joins us now. Jamil Jaffer. He's the founder and executive director of the National Security Institute, served in the George W. Bush White House as associate counsel to the president, handling the Defense and State Departments. Jamil, thanks so much for coming on the show. Appreciate it. So what am I getting wrong here?
Well, Dan, look, I mean, one thing we know right now is that Vladimir Putin is killing civilians with alarming regularity. He's targeting hospitals. He's targeting schools. He's targeting the core infrastructure of Ukraine in an effort to force the Ukrainian population and the Ukrainian government into making concessions. And so we know that's happening today. It's theoretically possible that if we enforce a no-fly zone, that we could get into a larger shooting war. It's also possible that we bring this conflict to a much more rapid end because Vladimir Putin is under pressure to do something that he doesn't have any incentive to do now, which is negotiate to a real solution at the present time.
All right, but let's assume everything you said is accurate, right? That one of those two outcomes could occur, right? Either it gets us in deeper and directly against Russia, or it helps. Is that a risk that we should be willing to take, that we may get into a deeper conflict directly with Russia?
Well, what is the alternative? If we look at the alternative right now, we continue to supply weapons to the conflict. It goes on longer and longer and longer. More and more civilians die in the heart of Europe. And remember that we've seen this show before. It's not like giving Vladimir Putin Crimea back in 2014 was enough. It wasn't like saying, hey, you can take Luhansk, you can take Donetsk. That's going to be enough. Vladimir Putin is going further. The more he sees weakness on our part, the more likely it's to do more and do more and more damage. He's seen, if they're only going to do sanctions, I'm going to go across the border. If they only do oil and gas bans, I'm going to go after civilian targets. If the Ukrainians stand up to me, I'm going to get more aggressive. At every turn, we've showed weakness. Vladimir Putin has doubled down. The right answer is to intervene now, stop the killing, and bring this conflict to a rapid close. Otherwise, we're in for weeks, months, maybe years of civilians in Ukraine being targeted and killed by one of the world's most powerful militaries.
You know, the argument that is made always relates to civilians, and we get it, right? We watch these horrifying images of these civilians being attacked in Ukraine. Very difficult to watch, very difficult to stomach. And yet, I always listen and think about the argument that others make about, well, there are humanitarian issues throughout the world, right? And my response to them always is, yeah, but this is different. There is a geopolitical interest for the United States here that doesn't exist in certain other conflicts around the world. And as a result, I do support the kind of aid that we're giving to Ukraine, the amount of attention we're giving to it that we don't give to other humanitarian crises around the world. But if you base it on humanitarian reasons, right? If the argument is we have to protect civilians, and that's the reason we're going in, and it's not geopolitical, et cetera, then I think you're going down a dangerous slope where you got to start protecting everyone around the world where there are major humanitarian crises. Your response?
Look, I think you're right. It's a little bit of both. It's a humanitarian catastrophe, but it's also a major geopolitical issue. And if the answer is we don't ever go up militarily against a nation with nuclear weapons, that means Taiwan is game over. That means China takes Taiwan, we're going to do nothing about it. If our view is we can't do anything about Russian aggression because they have nuclear weapons, well, then what does it mean to be a superpower, right? At some point, the U.S. has to say enough is enough to Russia. And the only question then is now enough, or do we wait till there are another 10,000 civilians dead, and then we'll say enough is enough?
Yeah, and I guess the difference is you say can't do, and I would say won't do, right? Meaning we could do. I just think that there has to be a choice, and the lines are clear, right? If Putin ends up going after NATO countries, if he starts bombing Poland, of course we have to get involved. And you might argue, well, this is the way to stop him from continuing in that direction. But the risk just seems to me so great that we should be doing anything possible to help the Ukrainians while avoid crossing that final line. Final word from you.
Dan, I totally agree with you. We don't want to cross that line of World War III. But in many ways, this situation, while the parallels aren't identical, reminds us of Hitler and Czechoslovakia. The British thought if we just let him have Czechoslovakia, that'll be enough. We saw it fail there. We saw it fail in the Obama administration with Crimea. Why would we make the same mistake here? And if we do make the same mistake here, remember, the Chinese are watching. Won't we make the same mistake in Taiwan? At some point, the U.S. has to say the killing in Ukraine, the invasion of a sovereign country by a major world power is not acceptable. It's not acceptable to us, not acceptable to the NATO nations. We can't let them cross that line. And it doesn't have to just get to NATO. We have to do something now, and we will avoid a conflict by going in now and saying, look, we're going to enforce this. We're not going to shoot any Russian fighter jets down unless you violate the no-fly zone, unless you shoot at us.
Yeah. All right, we shall see. I promised you the final word. You get it. Jamil Jaffer, thanks for coming on the show. Appreciate it. Thank you for watching. Click the red subscribe button below so you can get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.